Hi! You may have noticed Jake is not here. That's because Jake is sick, so it's the Ashley show today. Welcome. Something kind of crazy happened this week in the world of Warhammer. There's a little bit of controversy around public information and how that should be communicated. And unfortunately, I know absolutely nothing about Warhammer. But I do know a lot about Magic the Gathering, so let's talk about it. Today we're going to talk about public information, what should be communicated, and how it should be communicated. So if you're interested in that conversation, pull up a chair, have a seat at the table. And if you are a button mash hack and slash controller bash, or a meeple moving mastermind of mats, and minis. If you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack pick attack number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Ashley. Let's talk games. All right, so before we start this conversation, I think it's really important for us to establish what is public information in the game of Magic the Gathering. Now, we know there's several different areas, right? You got your graveyard, you got your deck, you got what's on the battlefield, you got what's in your hand, and you have your exile zone, and I guess your command zone if you're playing a commander. And all of these have different levels of public information, right? So things that are fully public, so things that everyone at the table should know or should have access to, is what is on the battlefield. The only exceptions I can think of are if something's played face down, so like a morph card or something kind of within that vein. But generally, everything that's on the table, your opponents should be allowed to see and be able to read or understand what they do. In your graveyard, that's also public information. So how many cards are in your graveyard, what those cards are, what they do, how many are creatures, how many are enchantments, etc. Other things that are public information are how many cards are in your hand. So we're pulling back a little bit on how much people can see, right? Because what's in your hand is not public information. But I should be able to ask you how many cards are in your hand. And you should tell me, I got 3 cards in my hand, right? I also get to know what is tapped or untapped on the battlefield. So I can say, how many lands do you have untapped? And you should tell me, I have 2 blue lands untapped. And that might change the way that I play my turn, knowing you might have a counterspell in hand, right? So those are some examples of public information. Other examples that I can think of are if something has been exiled, if it's exiled face up, I get to know what's been exiled. What's in your command zone, right? I get to see what your commander is and what it does. How many cards are in your library, right? So we know how many cards are in your graveyard, in your hand, in the exile zone, and on the battlefield. So that means I get to know how many cards are in your library. All right, so now we've established what is public information. Now let's talk about manners and etiquette when you're playing Magic the Gathering. Now there are a couple ways that I've seen people kind of communicate while they're playing, and I think it's important to establish when you are playing Magic the Gathering, you're having a conversation. This is an opportunity for you to say, I play this. Do you have a response? All right, no, then it comes back to me, it resolves. And I think a really, really good habit to get into is talking through your turn, right? So untap, upkeep, draw. I'm going to play a land for turn. I tap 4 and I'm going to play this card. Do you have a response? Do you have a response? Do you have a response? Okay, it resolves. Next, I'm going to, etc., etc., etc. And you're going to talk through your phases, right? So that's first main phase. So you can say, next I move to combat. I'm attacking here. Do you have blockers? Okay, attack declared, block declared, resolve. All right, now we're moving to main phase 2. I'm going to play this. Any responses? No? Okay, resolve. Move to end step, pass turn. So now it's very, very clear what is happening. And that's something that's helpful at all stages of Magic the Gathering. For beginners, it's helpful because it helps them to remember what they're doing. For more experienced players, it's helpful because they're talking through what's happening on the board. And also for competitive players, I would say it's even more important. Because there's this idea that, you know, when you're playing competitive, sometimes you maybe want to rush through the game because everybody's really good, so you want to make sure you're going fast and making sure that plays are happening and that the game is resolving. But in reality, you want to slow down and take your time. You want to make sure that you are playing correctly and that everything is resolving in the way that it should, and people have the opportunity to step in when they should have that opportunity to respond. And if you're skipping past those turns, that's something that could get you dinged in a competitive level. So that etiquette is something that is really important to establish, and it's a really good habit to get into when you're playing at any level of Magic. All right, so now we've established what is public information. We've established what is proper etiquette for playing Magic the Gathering. And now I want to start thinking about, with this public information, how much do I communicate and how do I communicate that information? And I think that really changes based on level of play, who you're playing with, and that rule zero conversation of, what do we need to know before we start this game of Magic? What are our goals for this game of Magic, and what are the outcomes that we hope for, aside from obviously trying to win the game? So let's break that down into beginner casual, intermediate casual, competitive casual, and then competitive in a tournament situation. Because I think that looks a little bit different based on kind of how you're playing. So when you're teaching someone how to play Magic, or you're playing at a table where there's somebody who's maybe a little bit newer to Magic, and they don't have a full understanding of how all of the mechanics work in Magic yet, and they don't really understand fully yet when they get to respond, how resolution happens, maybe they don't fully understand the stack, this is the time for you to kind of over-communicate. So an example is in my mono black deck, one of my win conditions is Wound Reflection and Fraying Omnipotence. Now, I could just do my best and play one card and then hope that nobody notices, the next turn play my other card. And there are situations where I will do that. I think that's important. But if I'm playing with a new player, I'll play Wound Reflection and I will verbalize, hey y'all, just so you're aware, this is one half of my win condition. If I play the other half, I win unless you can respond. And I'll leave it at that. That gives them the opportunity to understand, one, this is a threat. Ashley is a threat. I should probably deal with that. Two, recognizing when things kind of work together in order to move towards a win. And three, if they've never seen my deck before, they won't understand how scary that is. And my mono black deck loves to surprise people, right? It loves to sit there with big, scary, smashy demons in play, and then I win on a combo. And so if I'm playing with newer players, I want to give them that opportunity. I want to make it feel good for them and help them to understand how the game of Magic works, how to respond to things, when it's important to respond to things. And, is this going to lose them the game? Because it feels bad if you don't understand what's happening and you lose and you don't know why. And maybe you could have responded, but you're not sure because no one gave you that opportunity. So when you're playing with beginner players or when you're playing with new players, I would recommend over-communicating. Help them understand what's happening. Make sure they know when they should respond if they can. And make sure that they have an understanding that you are going for the win in time for them to actually respond to that win, if possible. All right, so we talked about what a beginner game looks like when you're playing with new players who don't fully understand the game. Let's move on to intermediate. So maybe this is a group of people that you play with often and they have a good understanding of what your deck does. Or you're playing with people that generally have been playing Magic for a long time. So maybe they haven't seen your deck specifically before, but they've demonstrated that they have an understanding and knowledge of the game. They know how the stack works. They understand turn and what happens in a turn. They understand when to respond to things. They're pretty good, it seems like, at assessing threat level. Now is the time you continue to be incredibly clear what you're playing, but you get to decide how much information you share. And this might be part of that rule zero conversation, right? So you're having the conversation, you ask them, what are you playing? This is your opportunity to tell them what your deck does, right? So often we like to kind of maybe hide what's in our deck, but we're trying to establish power level here. So you need to know how I win. Do I win with combos? Do I win with instant wins? Am I like a turn 3-4 speed deck? Or am I kind of like a sit and play control-y deck that likes to win turn 5, 6, 7? etc. What is my power level? Do I run search? Do I run fast land? Do I run mana acceleration? What do I run that establishes power level in my deck? And how do I win so that we can figure out what kind of game we want to play? That might not be a conversation you have always with newer players because they might not fully understand what that looks like. So take that with a grain of salt. Help the newer player figure out what deck level they're playing. Maybe ask information and be clear with them when you do have, like, this is how my deck wins. But I'd say intermediate players or more experienced players, that's really where you want to make sure you're clear what your deck does, how it does that thing, and maybe what kinds of things you run in it. And again, this is casual play, right? So the goal of this is to make sure that everybody has a fun and relatively even gameplay experience. Everybody's deck kind of gets to do sort of what they want it to do, and you're evenly matched. And so that's kind of the level of communication that's expected when you are playing at an intermediate table. So now we've kind of talked about beginners, where you want to be overly clear with everything you're doing. Intermediate, where you want to make sure you are clear about what your deck does and how it does it, and maybe tell them if you're going for the win, depending on if your deck likes to win via surprise or not. But now I want to talk about competitive casual. So you're not playing in a tournament. Maybe you're at Friday Night Magic and there's a group of people with CEDH decks. Or, I don't know, competitive standard or competitive whatever you play. But their decks are power. And they tell you their decks are power. And you establish in your Rule Zero conversation, I am playing competitive whatever. So they understand that this is going to be a power game. You are not going to pull your punches, and you are going to play as effectively as possible with the deck that you have. Now that you've established this, there's a lot more opportunity for gray area information, right? This is where you still want to establish, this is what my deck does. Here's my commander. Here's how I win, right? To give them an idea of what you're playing and make sure that they actually do have a deck that's on par with your deck. And when you're talking about competitive EDH, you're talking about the same kind of competitive EDH. But when you're going for the win, you are under no obligation to tell this group of people that you are going for the win. If your win is a surprise, this is your opportunity to kind of keep it a surprise, keep hidden information, and use that to their advantage. If they are not paying attention, as long as you are clearly communicating your turns and giving the opportunity for everyone to respond, this is where you're not really under any obligation to explain, I am playing this, it is part of my win condition. There's no reason for you to say that. You can probably assume that everybody at the table, unless otherwise stated, has an understanding what's in your deck, what your deck is trying to do, power threat assessment, and when they should and how they should respond. So again, maintaining that clarity in conversation, talking through your turn with untap, upkeep, draw, play this, I do this, responses, I do this, responses, combat, etc., main phase 2, end step, end my turn, pass turn, right? So you're still having that clear communication, but this is where you get to start playing with some of that hidden information in a way that can be really fun and exciting. You get to play a little bit more on that surprise level where you don't necessarily have to tell them that you're going for the win, and it's not necessarily expected because it's likely they understand what's happening at your table. They know what you're doing, and they're going to try to stop you in the best way they can. So this is where the gloves come off and you really start to kind of like stop pulling your punches, stop explaining what's happening and what is going to happen, and let them figure it out. And that can be a really fun and exciting way to play. So there's another level of play, right? So we've talked about beginners, we've talked about kind of intermediate or more experienced players, non-CEDH. We've talked about CEDH in a non-competitive setting, so casual competitive EDH where you're playing at Friday Night Magic, no prize on the line, just for fun. But I think it's also important to understand that there's another level of play, and that's in competition. And I would say this is the time where you have to be incredibly careful about what information you reveal. Because when you start to play, there are different rules at different tournaments for, is the deck list public information? Do you get to know what you're playing against ahead of time? If it's competitive EDH, you still get to know what your opponent's commander is, but they might not tell you which way they've built that commander. They might have something new and interesting in there, or they might have built it kind of maybe not mainstream, slightly off-brand version of that commander, or maybe it goes for a win in a slightly different direction. You don't get to know that information. But on the other hand, you also are under no obligation to tell that to your opponent. If you're playing in a competition where you have a sideboard, you also don't have to reveal what you're sideboarding in or how you're changing your deck after that first round of play to make it more effective against your opponent. And so all of a sudden that hidden information that changes the way that we think and changes the way that we play becomes incredibly relevant. This is where you get to kind of pay attention and maybe have to ask the question, do you have anything untapped? Do you have anything in your graveyard? Is your, I don't know, do you have enough mana to play your commander next turn on the table? Right? And they have to answer those basic public information questions, but they don't have to give you any additional information. You don't either. Right? And so this is where all of a sudden that hidden information becomes incredibly important, and it becomes a part of the way that you think about how you're going to play. And I think that's the biggest difference that we see between competitive EDH at a casual table and competitive EDH when there's actual prizes on the line. All right, so we kind of have walked through the different levels of play and the different levels of communication that go alongside with that. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when playing Magic the Gathering is it's a community game. Again, Magic is a conversation, so don't be a jerk. That's kind of our main point here, right? Play to the level that makes sense in the area that you're in, and understand that sometimes it's better to be okay revealing that information if it makes a better experience for everybody there at the table. But also understand, as you get more and more competitive, that information becomes an opportunity for strategy and being very intentional with what you reveal, how you reveal it, and how you reveal information about what you're seeing on other players' tables can be really important. So, I don't know, play Magic, don't be a jerk, have a lot of fun, and I'll see you next time. Great, because what I was thinking is it's like if a giant human is walking next to little tiny humans, it's really easy for them to squish the tiny humans. But that's a dick move, don't do that! Okay?